Hi everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Recovery Talk. Can you believe I've been doing this podcast every single week for over a year and I still have not run out of topics to talk about? If anything, my list of things to talk about is just growing and growing and growing. Sometimes a topic just jumps up in my head. Other times it is something that comes up in my sessions with clients. Other times it is of the ask box on Instagram where I ask you guys for topic suggestions, things you want to talk about. That is actually very often where I find ideas for new episodes. So thank you all who are contributing to, giving me ideas, offering listener questions. It was very helpful in terms of creating this podcast, right? But this episode's topic actually came in part from a Instagram reel from the wonderful Emily Spence. Emily's Instagram is Emily Spence with 2 underdashes if you don't follow already. And basically what Emily was talking about in the reel was that it is okay to enjoy recovery. It's okay to be excited about the prospect of eating more foods, It's okay to enjoy recovery, basically. That made me think of something that I see coming up in sessions over and over, and that is people with eating disorders feeling actually kind of excited, like scared, yeah, maybe, but also excited about the prospect of increasing their intake, of eating more. And then they're wondering, well, if I feel excited about eating, if I wake up excited for my breakfast, that just means that I probably don't have an eating disorder, right? It can't be like that. Aren't you supposed to just be kicking and screaming before every meal? So I wanted to make an episode about enjoying food and enjoying recovery and why this is completely okay and completely normal, and why different thoughts and feelings around recovery can exist at once. One thing we see very often with eating disorders is that it decreases a person's ability of cognitive flexibility, right? So holding 2 truths in their head at the same time. More often when you see people with eating disorders tend to think in black and white, right? It would be black and white thinking instead of being in the gray. So things is good or bad, right? It's wrong or right, instead of looking at that nuance. And this is something I work a lot on with clients, making their thinking more flexible and being able to hold several perspectives and truths in their heads at once. But I also find that cognitive flexibility actually tends to improve with refeeding weight restoration as well. So there seems to be a biological component to it as well. So that's pretty interesting. But anyways, the reason why I'm mentioning the importance of holding several truths in your head at once is because this is so relevant when it comes to recovery and the prospect that you can be excited about recovery. You can be excited about, allowing yourself rest, allowing yourself more food, trying different foods, at the same time be kind of scared of recovery. Or it could even be that you don't necessarily feel that much fear, right? Maybe it just feels like a huge relief to let go. Like maybe that is for you the overwhelming feeling towards recovery. And we always talk about recovery so hard, recovery this, recovery that. And of course, in one way, it's validating because recovery can be damn difficult, But I very rarely find that it is just the act of eating itself that is the most difficult part. Lifting the fork to your mouth is not necessarily the difficult part of recovery. The difficult part of recovery depends from person to person, right? Everyone has one thing or several things in recovery that for them is more difficult, and then other things that's more easy. I think for me personally, during my own recovery, the most difficult part was actually finding meaning outside of my eating disorder and recovery. Like, who am I? What am I going to focus on now? What am I doing now? That self-discovery part was definitely the most difficult part for me. Actually eating and following my meal plan and hitting my minimums, that was pretty easy. Like, okay, don't get me wrong. In the beginning, when I was in the process of increasing, it felt like, oh my God, this is too much. This is, it felt difficult in the beginning. But just my personality, I'm very like bam, bam, bam. If I make a commitment to something, I will do it. So it's almost like in recovery, I had the mindset that I don't really have a choice. I need to eat, right? And I think that mindset really, really helped me. Because I like when I get specific instructions. I love specific instructions. I like knowing this is what to do, this is what not to do. And I felt that I kind of built myself up a system in recovery where based on science and my treatment team, I found that, yeah, this is the right thing to do. And that felt pretty straightforward in my head, at least. And I understand some people may not be able to relate to that. They may feel like they get 15 different advices and they don't know what route and path to take, right? But for me, I feel like I managed to carve out a route that made sense to me, which was focusing on refeeding, weight restoration, rewiring. There was, in my case, consistency between the scientific literature, which I was, to be completely honest, desperately researching because I needed reassurance, right? And my treatment team, right? So there was no like this major discrepancy between them, which also made it easier. So overall, what I'm trying to say is that following a meal plan and eating more was not necessarily the most difficult part in recovery. If anything, I was pretty excited about it a lot of the time. Yeah, there were times where I was kind of like, oh, screw this, especially when I had times where I was just so full and, feeling triggered. It was not always easy per se, but in general, that was not the most difficult part of my recovery. I remember going to bed at night and I was so excited about going to bed because it was like a time machine, I just woke up and boom, it was breakfast, like a time machine to breakfast, And don't get me wrong, I still enjoy a breakfast, but when I go to bed, that's not what I think about. That's not like what I'm the most excited about. Like, oh my God, I get to eat breakfast tomorrow. I actually think that if that is what is on someone's mind, that could be a sign that they're a little bit undernourished and they may be restricting themselves from it, and therefore it's exciting. Because I know that I can just have some cereal before bed if I want. I don't need to wait until the morning to have my lovely cereal. I'm allowing myself food and access to all kinds of food throughout the entire day, and therefore it's lost some of its excitement. But in recovery, the prospect of allowing myself unconditional permission to eat and allowing myself access to food throughout the entire day, that was new to me, so it felt really, really exciting. And actually, in my case, I didn't really feel like, oh, this means that I don't have an eating disorder, right? I didn't really think of that. Again, I think I'm just so logical that I just knew that, well, I have an eating disorder. I mean, it's literally on a piece of paper in terms of my diagnosis, not really something I can like argue against, right? Not to say that a diagnosis is what makes an eating disorder valid, right? Because obviously not most people with eating disorders are not diagnosed. That doesn't mean that they don't have an eating disorder. In the same way that if you break your leg is broken, even though you didn't have a diagnosis of leg being broken, it's still broken leg, right? But anyways, that was just a bit of a side note on how my brain works. As you can see, my brain is very logical, very straightforward, right? But I hear a lot of people thinking that because they enjoy recovery, because they are excited about the meal, excited about the prospect of, rest and giving themselves access to more foods, actually eating those fear foods that they have been fantasizing about for so long. Basically, that excitement, they think that because they have that excitement, that means that they can't have an eating disorder, or they feel immense shame for feeling that way. And I want to remind you this, feeling excitement about eating more, at the same, you can maybe feel a little bit scared of increasing your intake, but also feel really excited about the thought of eating these foods you've been banning yourself from. That is the norm rather than a deviation. Yes, I'm sure there are cases where someone is just not excited about food at all, no interest, and they just have no excitement around it. Of course, I'm sure those cases exist. But from my experience actually working with eating disorders, the norm is that people, even though they may be a bit scared, they also are excited. And it's literally, it makes so much sense. Like, think biologically, right? You are undernourished. Your body and brain is literally primed to focus on food and finding it more rewarding. Imagine you're walking out and it's super, super hot outside, right? So you are sweating and for some reason you don't have access to anything to drink, right? And all you can think about is just having like a big glass of ice cold water, right? And then when you are accessing that cold water, finally, after being dehydrated and thirsty for so long, it's going to be so rewarding. I swear, if we did like a MRI scan of your brain as you were drinking that water, you could probably see just that everything light up because you were so excited about it. Because you're deprived of it, you're dehydrated, your brain is wired to find it extra rewarding when you are finally getting access to that water. And before you get access to that water, your brain is primed to make you hyper-focused on the fact that you're thirsty and you need to drink. So on a normal day when you're not dehydrated, you may walk past the advert for bottled water. You might walk past and not even notice that advert. But when you are dehydrated, chances are you will really notice it, pay attention to it, and be like, oh my God, that looks tempting. And you see this with eating disorders as well, right? People with eating disorder have a tendency to really notice, for example, if they see a food advert, they may really notice it, right? I remember during my eating disorder, I loved looking at recipes. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily prepare them or eat them. I just liked looking at recipes online. I liked looking at food pictures. I would collect pictures of different like foods and like cakes. And funnily enough, in my case, and in a lot of other cases as well, I use this as a sign that I'm emotionally eating or addicted to food, can't be controlled around food, abnormally obsessed with food, therefore I need to restrict because I can't be controlled around food because I'm too obsessed with it. That was my interpretation, when the actual interpretation was you are undernourished, right? So I managed to swap it to you don't need food, when actually the answer to why I was behaving that way was you really need food. You need it now. You need a lot of food. You need different types of food, not just your safe foods. So basically what I'm trying to communicate here is that finding food extremely rewarding and finding, that allowing yourself that unconditional permission to eat in recovery, finding that a rewarding thing is completely normal because your brain is literally programmed that way, and you can be excited and anxious for something at the same time, right? Anxiety and excitement are actually very, very similar emotions in the body. And very often you can confuse one with the other, and other times you may feel like you're experiencing both at the same time. For instance, someone is going on a date, right? They may feel really like anxious about the date, but at the same time also feel really excited. These are not opposing emotions. They're actually pretty similar emotions. If anything, they're physically pretty much the same in the body in terms of how physically those emotions manifest and act in the body. It's more just that one is labeled bad and the other one is labeled good, right? And sometimes when you are feeling, anxious, it can be helpful to reframe it in certain situations to, oh, I'm just excited, right? So imagine, for example, you having a date. Try and think, oh, I'm just so excited, right? Of course, this doesn't work in all cases, it's not like you're being chased by a bear and you're just like, oh, I'm just so excited to be chased by this bear, right? It doesn't work in all cases, but in some cases it can really work. At least it has helped me quite a bit. And I also want to remind you that it's normal for feelings to swing a lot in recovery, right? You may have one day where you're feeling really, really excited about a meal and excited about eating more, excited about recovery in general. And then you have another day where it's the complete opposite. This is also normal. Who said that recovery was supposed to be this like linear thing that is just always consistent in terms of how you feel and think around it? Who said that? Like, where did you get that from? Recovery is sometimes just an explosion of weird, conflicting emotions and urges and ideas. It's so confusing at times, and that is okay. But one thing that I would say as an observation I have seen in people with eating disorders is that it is more common than not to have some level of excitement around food. Maybe not all the time in your recovery. Some people may notice that they go through a period where food is just boring, they're not interested, their appetite is low. That can happen as well. But in general, it is pretty common for an undernourished person to find food extra rewarding and interesting, exciting. And it also is common to swing here. So for example, you may have one day which you just can't eat. Food is just, nope. And then the next day, you're super excited thinking about your breakfast, right? It is okay. Or you may find that your entire recovery, you're just super excited about food and it just feels like a huge relief. That is also normal and okay. That doesn't mean you don't have an eating disorder. You feeling super excited about waking up for breakfast doesn't mean that you don't have an eating disorder. If anything, it is a good indicator that you do, because people without eating disorders probably don't spend their evening before going to bed, oh my God, I'm so excited I'm going to get to have breakfast, right? Because they are not primed to be that excited about food, right? I remember during my own recovery, part of why I was also kind of excited about it is that it felt like it gave me some kind of meaning. It was like a project that was mine that I could work on, a goal to work towards, right? And this is pretty common because us human beings, the way we find meaning and purpose in life is by solving problems and having goals to work towards. And in some unhealthy way, I guess my eating disorder gave me that, right? Through restrictive disordered behaviors, that gave me purpose and goals. But now I swapped it so I had healthier goals that actually got me forward rather than backwards. So as much as my eating disorder hated it, the healthy part of me really enjoyed having something to work towards, having this project, having this meaning and purpose. This is also why sometimes recovery can become difficult to let go of, right? Because that means essentially finding other purpose and meaning and goals in life rather than just recovery. And don't let your eating disorder take what I just said as a reason not to do recovery because you're scared of being too obsessed with recovery and then recovery would just become your new life. No. Don't go there. Don't go there. I know your eating disorder can be sneaky that way. Because equally, you actually need to go through recovery. You can't just skip recovery and just be like, oh, I don't want my life to be recovery, therefore I'll just skip that step. I just go from eating disorder to recovered in like an hour. Like, that's not really how it works, right? You have to go through the process of recovery to get there. So the only way is through it, not around it, right? But basically, what I would recommend to you is to accept recovery as a necessary process. Accept that conflicting thoughts, emotions, and feelings may occur. Don't feel shame for actually enjoying food or finding it liberating at times. That does not mean that you never had an eating disorder and you were just faking it and you're using recovery as like an excuse to eat more, blah, blah, blah. I've heard it all. I have heard it all. Remind yourself that you're literally experiencing the normative, most common experience in eating disorder recovery. You are wired to find food more interesting, more rewarding. That's literally in your biology. And you may think, oh, but I didn't have that urge to eat during my eating disorder in the same way. Well, the thing is that with eating disorders, some eating disorders, the behavior become mental hunger and food obsession and food focus rather than just eating. Other people may experience the eating part, right? But then in restrictive eating disorder, there'll be some kind of compensatory behaviors following. For example, in my case, as someone with binge purge type anorexia, I would spend all day hyper-focusing about that cake that I saw online and save it on my phone, picture of that cake so I can look at it and get some kind of kick out of looking at that cake. But I would also eat the cake. The thing is that I would eat the cake, but then I would purge afterwards, right? Whilst other people may hyper-focus on that cake and just don't eat the cake. But overall, what we see is this mental hunger, this food obsession, this food-seeking behavior, this desire to have some kind of a proximity to food, whether that is going in the grocery store for excessively long, cooking for others, cooking for yourself as well. It's overall food-seeking behavior, food-focused behavior. This is a sign that you need to eat. It is not a sudden onset interest. And yes, there are people who are just very interested in food. You know, there are people who are generally just, they love food. They are maybe chefs or, you know, obviously this exists. I'm not saying it doesn't exist, just like there exists a interest for everything else, right? But the big difference is that this is not a sudden onset interest that came during or after a period of undernourishment. So another thing that I've been thinking a lot about is the narrative around recovery being hard, being a struggle, blah, blah, blah. Like, I get it. It's a way to kind of validate for people who are going through a difficult time that, yeah, this is hard. This is hard work, right? Obviously, that is true. But equally, I wonder sometimes if that narrative can almost make people feel like they must struggle for their recovery to be valid or their eating disorder to be valid. And if they find that actually recovery was not that hard, it's almost like they need to create some kind of struggle to kind of validate themselves. And I just want to remind you, you don't measure the severity of an eating disorder based on how miserable you are in recovery. There is no badge of honor or award for being the most miserable in recovery and struggling the most in recovery and crying the most in recovery. There's no punishment for it either. You know, you're not a bad person if that is your recovery. It's not like you're failing recovery for finding it difficult, but equally you're not failing recovery for finding it easy. Or perhaps more accurately, you're not failing your eating disorder, if that makes sense, for finding it easy to recover. It does not invalidate your eating disorder in any way, shape, or form. And one thing that I often do with clients is looking for moments of joy in recovery and looking for ways to make it kind of fun and exciting at times, right? This is why I always encourage, implementing fun foods that maybe you haven't tried in some time, right? For example, if you were obsessed with Oreo cookies before your eating disorder, implement them, right? Or if you're just going through a nut butter phase where all you can think about is nut butter and you just want to eat it, implement it. Try new foods maybe as well. Maybe you have something you've seen, maybe like an advert for this new chocolate bar that you really want to try. Implement it. Have fun with it. Because chances are you're never going to find food as rewarding, as exciting as you do right now. In the future, when you're fully recovered, you may see an advert for that new chocolate bar and yeah, you might be like, oh, nice, looks cool, but you're not going to be that excited about it anymore. I remember during my eating disorder, I even just like, there was like this new flavor of gum that came out, or I find this flavor of gum. Maybe it wasn't even new, but it was not in my country. And I spent hours researching on it. Oh, this gum flavor, where can I get it? No. I was looking into ordering it online, paying a shit ton in import taxes. Because my brain was so primed to focus on food and find it rewarding. Even so-called replacement food such as gum, which I essentially just chewed in a way to satisfy my cravings in a way that felt safer to me. Obviously, you don't get satisfaction from chewing a cake-flavored gum when you're craving the cake, right? And now if I see, I don't know, new flavored chocolate bar or gum, I mean, I might notice and be like, okay, cool. Maybe I'll try it, maybe I won't, but it just won't be that important to me anymore. Because I've taken it off the pedestal and I'm no longer undernourished. But do you know what? Even if it feels a bit silly to be this excited about, trying that new chocolate bar, it's okay. It's literally just your brain being primed to find it rewarding. And no need to feel ashamed about that. Why not instead just think, well, might as well enjoy it. Food right now is so much fun, so rewarding. Might as well just go with it, right? And I understand this does not go for everyone. I understand there's some people who listen to this who maybe are in the stage of recovery where food is just kind of boring and bland and they're just like, and I'm more in the mechanical eating part. That also is something that can happen to people, right? Every experience is individual, but overall, it is not uncommon to find food interesting and rewarding when you're undernourished. It is very, very, very common. Enjoy it. Try new things. Make recovery fun. Try that new snack. Have a movie night with yourself where you're buying those foods that you really want to try. Why not have fun with it? Why not have fun with food? You don't need to just follow like a bland, boring meal plan of rice and bread all day. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying rice and bread is inherently boring. I mean, they're great foods, And maybe for some people they're really exciting. I definitely had that with bread especially. I was so excited to eat bread and I would like try all kinds of breads, blah, blah, blah. But what I'm saying is you can make it fun, right? And you can find something fun and exciting and a little bit scary at the same time. You might find it a huge relief to finally allow yourself the rest that you know you need. At the same time, you may also feel some guilt about it, right? It can exist different thoughts and feelings at once. Or maybe you feel guilt for not feeling guilt about it, right? The complexity is real, guys. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this episode. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take a listener question. This one is from Instagram Askbox. If you follow me on Instagram at letsrecover.co.uk or at Amalie Lee, you know that I occasionally pop in a Askbox to take topic requests or to take listener questions. And I know I say this all the time, but I will say it again. I want to thank you guys for all the wonderful messages you send me or leave in the Ask box or, even emails, ways you contact me to let me know that you are appreciating this podcast and, you guys leaving good reviews or sharing it. It means so much. I think that's also part why I've stayed so consistent with this podcast. It's just like knowing that it means a lot for a lot of people and it's something I enjoy doing, right? There's just so much like fast information out there, like, oh, can you give us this information in like 10 seconds or can you give us this in like a few sentences? And I feel like podcasts instead allows me to go more in depth, right? And explain things a bit more thoroughly, right? And not feeling like I must, catch someone's attention in 2 seconds like it is with a lot of reels and TikToks, etc., etc. I don't know. It's just not really my kind of thing, Anyways, okay, now to the listener question. So the person here is asking if it's normal to only have extreme hunger for processed carbs and fats. And the answer to that is yes, that is completely normal. There are a few reasons as to why this tends to happen. So the first one is an undernourished body will very often tend to get cravings for food that offer a quick source of energy. And equally, it tends to give you cravings for the foods you've been, the food groups you've been restricting, right? So imagine if you've been someone who've been restricting carbs, right? Or you've been restricting fats, then it's very, very logical and common that that is what your body will crave. And then equally, as I mentioned, your body wants a quick source of energy, right? Why would an undernourished body get you to eat, chicken and broccoli? Like, it would kind of be a waste. It's not what your body really needs. Your body needs quick energy because it senses famine and it basically tells you, hey, we need to get as much food in here as quickly as possible, something that is very quick and easy for the body to get energy from. And that is processed foods, right? That is high energy foods. Equally, very often, it seems that certain foods that are highly processed, high in fats, high in carbs, very often these are foods that the person have been restricting themselves from. So there's a psychological component as well as a biological one, right? Where forbidden fruits taste the sweetest, the food that you ban yourself from, you put on a bit of a pedestal, so they become far more exciting. I always use this metaphor. It's like if you have a little child and the child might have a bunch of toys, but you take away one of the toys, like a random toy, and you say, you can't play with this one, put it up on the shelf. Then the child is suddenly going to be very, very interested in playing with that one toy and obsess over that one toy that's up there on the shelf. So that toy that's being put on a pedestal / shelf, becomes the one that they are programmed to focus on because forbidden fruits taste the sweetest, right? And the exact same thing goes with food. The big mistake people do here is that they think, well, if I feel, for example, around chocolate, I just can eat it, can't control myself around it. That means that I must take away the chocolates, right? That's very often the conclusion people make. And actually the solution is the complete opposite. The food that you feel like you can't, quote unquote, control yourself around, the food that you feel like you get the most hungry on, the food that you just want to eat, that is the food that you need to implement more. And implement it more freely, right? So for example, if you have extreme hunger in chocolate, right? Implement it throughout the day. Have some chocolate in your cereal, have some chocolate for snack with your coffee, Implement it more throughout the day. Implement it in unlimited quantities, as much as you want, whenever you want. Because the food is not going to take itself off the pedestal. You need to take it off the pedestal by giving yourself access to it. In the same way that with that child that's going to be obsessing over the toy that's on the shelf, take the toy off the shelf, give it to the child, then right off the bat, the child is going to be like, oh my God, so excited to finally have that toy again. But then it just becomes just another toy and they're going to start playing with the other toys as well. The same thing goes with food. So overall, when experiencing extreme hunger, I would recommend less overthinking and more eating, right? People often feel like they need to what can I say? Go full on CSI investigation on their cravings to find a logical reason as to why they're craving that food. But actually the truth is you don't really need to, you don't really need to. You just need to eat. They have the most insane cravings on chocolate pudding and you don't really know why. You just know that you have an insane craving for it. It's okay. You don't need to break down and investigate and psychoanalyze or biologically analyze every single craving for them to be valid. You just gotta eat. And by implementing it, it eventually becomes just another food. Hope that was helpful, and I hope you guys enjoyed this episode, and I look forward to seeing you guys next week.